Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, and welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science, where we are in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. I'm your host, Pavini Moray, and I'm delighted to introduce you today to Chandra Alexandre. Chandra is a tantric Bhairavi, an initiator in the tradition of Kali, serving the spiritual organization Sha'can as clergy. She is a householder and a regular pilgrim to the birthplace of Tantra in northeastern India, where she studies and practices with her teachers. Chandra was first initiated into the mysteries of the dark goddess in 1998 in Puri, Odisha, on the Dakshinachara path, and then 5 years later, she accepted the non-dualistic path of Vamachara Tantra at Kamakya in Assam. Her maternal grandmother was her first guide into the ways of the spirit in the world. On her initial return from India, Chandra founded Sha'can to serve those committed to embodied and engaged spirituality for social justice and transformation. This was the birth of the Sha'can tradition, an authentic lineage of Shakta Tantra, contextualized and made relevant for people and lands distant from the source. Chandra is known for her passionate engagement of theory and practice. She holds a PhD in Asian Comparative Studies from the California Institute of Integral Studies, a Doctor of Ministry degree from Wisdom University, and an MBA in Sustainable Management from Presidio Graduate School. Originally from New York, Chandra has since 1995 called San Francisco home. She is a devoted wife and mother, and also the conjurer of the Agori Bakery, Everyday Spiritual Conversations, her book, which is forthcoming. And you can learn more about her work at www.sharanya.org. That's SHARANYA.org. And feel welcome to attend a regular monthly puja held in San Francisco. So hi, Chandra, and welcome.
Hello, Pavini. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
It's such an honor. And just wanting to name that you are my teacher and my initiator in this tradition. And I have such respect for you and all that you've done for years and years and years in service to community. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I have so many wonderful questions and curiosities to ask you. You are a Rashani in the Sha'can tradition, which is an earth-based embodied spirituality lineage tradition that worships the divine feminine and practices the principles of Shakta Tantra. And I'm curious, according to your tradition, who and what are ancestors?
Our ancestors, according to my tradition, are those who have gone before and inhabited this realm in blood, bone, and body, have engaged in the spaces of nature and of thought, and who have passed on into another realm. And so our ancestors are very much connected to us through our DNA, through our bodies, through the wisdom learned and carried and hopefully tapped into in and through our bodies. And of course, I think it's important to name that we also pay particular homage to the ancestors of our lineage, those who we have direct connection to through a lineage tradition where teachings are passed from teacher to teacher, from student to teacher, and so on. I think I missed the teacher to student part of that, but are passed on through words, through presence, through what it means to be inhabited in the body, but that the lineage may not directly touch us, but through those teachers. And so the ancestors of our lineage are also ancestors that we honor and call upon because of their vibrancy and aliveness within the practices that we undertake as spiritual practitioners.
That's great. So it sounds like you're talking about two different branches of ancestors, ones that we're connected to biologically and the ancestors of a spiritual lineage tradition. Yeah?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that when to be really clear, when we articulate ancestors, we specifically mean of blood and bone. And when we articulate lineage, we specifically call on the kaula, the family, the spiritual family of those who have gone before, to inform the practices, the iterations of spirituality, of spiritual identity, of practice and work to, let's say, not just evolve personally, but evolve collectively, that are held within the tradition, are very much about honoring kaula, family, spiritual lineage.
Okay, and so it sounds like there's an evolving body of knowledge that's passed down person to person, and that each person contributes, and so we reflect back on where that started and the gifts that we've received from that, as well as adding to it and passing it on, and that's part of the practice. Yeah,
Iterative and evolving, absolutely, yes.
Okay, oh, great. And I'm curious, in this particular Hindu lineage, what are the practices and the ways that both of those types of ancestors are honored?
We could be here for quite some time. Let me articulate a few, and I think that maybe a sense of the robustness of that honoring will come through. There's a calling of the ancestors in each one of our rituals and our ceremonies, and you've been part of this, where we invoke the names of those who have gone before. We welcome them into our circle. And sometimes within that practice, even though we're inviting ancestors of blood and bone, we also recognize guides and teachers, and so hold that in a loose container or crucible for that invitation. So through recitation of names is another one where we acknowledge the lineage from which we come by acknowledging our four teachers, the gurus of the lineage, and we bring them in through name. So there's this practice of mantra that is very, very important to bring the vibrational energy of guides, teachers of spiritual lineage, of the beloved dead and the departed ancestors to be with us. And so that's a key and critical part of Tantra, is around really being present with not just the idea of, but actually invoking the energy of those ancestors. So that's one of the ways in which we do it. Another important way is through our own ritualized creation of spaces where we will make altars for those who have gone before. And very often it's about our family line. Usually the placement of our lineage ancestors is done next to the image of the divine, the murti that we're worshiping for a particular ceremony. And so the spiritual lineage will be kept in that place of reverence, and then a separate altar will be made for the ancestors of our bodies, of our families. I think the other piece to mention is that we're very aware of those who form kaula, who are not physically present, yet living and among us. And so we will actively invoke them as part of the family of worshipers during our ceremony as well. So I think I've articulated some different ways, but we intend to bring the recollection, the vibration, and the essence of all of those ancestors into our awareness as we engage the realm of spirit, the realm of the divine.
Thank you. In a lot of the research that I've been doing around ancestral reverence and traditions all over the world, there's often a practice of making offerings. And I don't know if that's true in this tradition. And I'm curious if you do.
I think actually you sent me something I wrote about making offerings, right? Yes, no, we do. We do make physical offerings. And it's interesting because as different parts of our own personal journeys evolve, it becomes at times increasingly important for us to honor where we come from, to heal schisms in the past, to heal traumas of the past, to evolve ourselves. The yearning of our personal quest takes us into relationship with our ancestors, perhaps in new and different ways, perhaps to see and acknowledge even something and or bring to consciousness something that we may not have had access to previously. And so the physical feeding, the physical offerings are a ritualized expression of the power of our connection, and symbolically are holding a place for the energy of love to be present and manifest, to remind us, to inform us, to draw us more deeply into relationship with the totality of who we are. And the awareness is around that our physical manifestation is a product of body and of spirit, of soul and of cells, of, this choice in time, from the sense of the spiritual move to incarnate, as well as the choice of those individuals who came together to physically form, and the ways in which we were physically formed in the body. And so the feeding and the making of offerings brings us into awareness in intentionality around the healing potential of love and the power of love to increase our ability to heal. So it's both activating and activated by those offerings, and an incredibly important part of the spiritual journey.
I love that. So it's like, if I am wanting to be more connected in a loving way with my ancestors, it sounds like one thing I could do is to make them physical offerings.
Absolutely.
And my guess is that there's nourishment that goes both ways through that process. Yeah.
Deep and profound nourishment. The symbols feed us. And sometimes it's interesting because I think so many who come from spaces and traditions where this is not often done, so many of us take time. It takes a while for us to get into the place where we can be nourished, both in order to let ourselves and allow ourselves to be nourished, to be loved, and to feel that love across space and time. But also to get to a place where it's not just a representation, and that it actually becomes something real, that we feel and experience from a place of devotion and connection. So that's a process in and of itself. But yes, it is absolutely both ways, much like in the process of ceremony. We use symbol and ritualized forms to communicate with the divine, and yet at the same time are expressing our own lived reality, and in a way holding a mirror up to our own process to see and be seen, and ideally, of course, express our willingness to be witnessed.
When you were just speaking about that, about how it's going both ways and the nourishment and getting to the place of being ready to receive love, I guess it was funny because what came to mind was the Christian tradition of communion. And I just hadn't ever made that connection. It's like, oh, right. It is in that religion as well, that there's like a way of being nourished by and accepting that nourishment into your body. And I think that maybe, I don't know about for other faiths, but it's interesting that that's kind of across different religions and traditions.
And I think probably will help many within the Christian faith who perhaps struggle with that moment.
Yeah. I love it. Well, I know that you're talking about how there are these different practices and technologies for honoring ancestors, but it's a little confusing sometimes because in Hinduism, there's a big belief about reincarnation, right? And so how does it happen that someone is both an ancestor and a reincarnated spirit?
It's a great question. And many have tied themselves up in knots around this particular one. And there are all different ways to approach this, but let me, I hope, simplify and say that you can think of it like this. I mentioned intentionality and spirit incarnating being a choice. And so that choice is reincarnation, the choice to come back, the choice to inhabit a body. And then there's the connection to the physical body and the process of the body dying and passing away. Our ancestors inhabit a loka, a world, a space, a time that is fully accessible to us. And I think this is important because as much as we invoke them, we can ask for them to invoke us. And so it's a question sometimes of their readiness to make the choice to incarnate. And I think that's the simplest way that I could describe it, that they inhabit a space and a realm and a time that for them is necessary for whatever the duration for the work they have to do. And sometimes for us to be engaged with them as potentiators for their reincarnation, which I think is a powerful concept. Then as the soul is ready to move into the making of the choice to re-inhabit a body, then it can make that choice. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's super helpful. What I'm getting is that in that loka, in that realm where they are without a body and they're hanging out there, right? They're just like in ancestor land, that there are things that they are doing to, like, that there's work that they can do there that they can only do there, or that we can only do there.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then there's a choice to reincarnate, and that it sounds like that we can support that process.
Yes, because they have to be afforded that opportunity in a way, right? That has to be something that they choose, and in relationship with the divine, in relationship with, let's say, she who is the potentiator of all of those possibilities, that much like an initiatory experience, right? It's not just the seeker who chooses, it's the one doing the initiation in relationship with the divine. So in a comparable way, once that door is opened, yes, then that choice can be made. And we can absolutely facilitate the work needing to be done. As I said, we can respond to the call of the ancestors as much as they can respond to our invocations and our call.
Oh my gosh, so many questions are coming up right now. That idea that it sounds like what you're saying is that death is one level of initiation.
I would say that that's true.
Yeah. And that idea that the ancestors, so okay, how do they impact us? Like this is leading into the question of, well, how do we even know that they're real, right? But you're saying we can invoke them, they can invoke us, they need us to do, to give them energy to do whatever it is that they have to do in their world before they can either choose with the divine to come back or not. But like, how do I know I'm not just making all this up?
Well, I suppose in one way of looking at it, I guess the saying would be, well, you could be. Of course you could be. I don't think that's true. That's certainly not my experience. And I think that by and large, right, perhaps we should say the ancestors generally don't engage with us. And if they do, we generally choose to ignore them. But when one chooses to initiate dialogue, exchange, when one opens oneself to that realm, then all sorts of things are possible, including, of course, the validation of their existence. I don't think we just get to a place from, let's say, ground zero where we have access to the ancestors. I think we go through a process in our practice and on our journeys, psycho-spiritual journeys, whatever we choose to call it, where it is, sort of to your earlier question, very disconnected. We don't feel like we're in relationship with them. We feel as though we're going through motions or actions, or we're leaving offerings, but we don't feel it yet. We don't feel the connection. But through disciplined practice, through dedication, through devotion, through the process of surrender over time, we get to a place where that realm becomes accessible to us. And so we can experience the ancestors in that realm, and they us in ways that are often helpful and often empowering, again, on that two-way sort of street. But I do think that it's not as though we immediately can say they're real, because we don't necessarily yet have access to them, and it requires a bit of work on our part to get there.
Practice.
Yes, absolutely.
Would you be willing to speak to your own experiences of your ancestors through your practices and how they impact your life?
Well, I think the acknowledgement of their reality is the first critical experience I ever had of it not being either a figment of my imagination or I don't know, something that I trusted but didn't really know. And that certainly took time. I think that what I could share is that over years of work and of determining how I could access the realm they inhabited and increasingly feeling welcomed in that space, I began to lose the sense of layers of disconnect, and the worlds became much more closely aligned. And so my ability to, let's say, take the express train into relationship with them, was facilitated, or I could just feel and be present with the ancestors in a way that I never had before. But again, through discipline and devotion, through the practice, through dedication. And not so much even through yearning. I had a curiosity about what that realm was like and about my ancestors and about the healing potentials there. And particularly as epigenetics has grown and sort of those scientific perspectives about what we carry in our DNA has grown, I've gotten more and more curious. But coming into relationship with ancestors, what I recognized was that they were everywhere, and they were available to us in all of the ways that could be helpful for whatever our process was. And that, again, in turn, we could help them. We could bring insights. We could, by virtue of our love and willingness to be just in that relationship of compassion, of love, of caring with them, could facilitate so much for the collective beyond our immediate selves. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, other than to say that I think it's important to know that I didn't set out with a specific intention. I am now going to, focus on this work, but that once it evolved, what I realized was the incredible gifts of being in relationship with ancestors, and that it did take work, but it wasn't work specifically directed with that, outcome in mind. And now in terms of how I feel them, I feel like I can dialogue with them in ways that are protective or help facilitate protection for me in my life, in ways that through my dreams and intuitions feel much more informed and or connected to patterns that aren't just about my own psychological disposition and makeup, but I bring insights into my interpretation and my way of seeing and viewing and being in the world that is much more informed by something larger than myself. And I find that beingness incredibly comforting and feeling as though I am healthier because of it.
Yeah. I like that you're talking about healing and the healing potential of having relationships with them, as well as feeling healthier because of being in relationship with them. I think that that's really important, just in terms of, here's another resource, for both personal and collective healing, right? And I know that as I've been doing this work, like I've started to feel increasingly responsible for my lineages. Like, I'm the one that's alive. I'm the one here at the front lines of life, right? Mm-hmm. And y'all are standing behind me, and I'm responsible. Like I can both tend to my own healing, tend to the lineage healing, as well as bring the gifts of the lineage through. And I think that that's what I heard you saying as well in your answer.
Yes, I think you encapsulated it really well. Yeah.
Well, why do you think that, ancestral reverence, it's an ancient tradition and practice, but why now? Why is it important for right now?
Why wouldn't it be important for right now if it's continued to be important? But in terms of your question, you mean, is there something special or an urgency held in this moment that would make this an important point of focus, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Well, I think there are many ways to answer that. I think that, as individuals break from, socialized or other harmful constructs and the ways in which those get politicized and reflected back at them as we seek, any one of us, to embark on a healing journey, and a journey of resistance to oppressions of any kind. That our ancestors, as you said, are important because there's a collective wisdom there. There's a wisdom of the individual, of the self, and there's a wisdom and a power of learnings and experiences that can help inform the shattering of whatever those constructions are. So I feel like important now, as more and more people are stepping up as individuals to claim the power and the voice of the individual in spaces of resistance, ancestors are key to helping us remain fortified and feel whole and protected and feel sane in so many of these spaces and in so many of these situations where to do what's right is so difficult, can be so difficult. I think that's one important piece. I think the other is, if we think about the innumerable crises of our world, and whichever one we're most passionate about, that there is something about a connection to ancestors and the tying into their lived experience in a different world that we can bring through. And we can help heal, again, not just for ourselves. I mean, I don't think we can completely separate the personal and the planetary, but I do think that in both our specific journeys and in what we can bring through recognizing the collective journey, I think ancestor work is incredibly both important and powerful.
I've been thinking a lot about elders and the importance of living elders. And for me, ancestor worship is kind of an extension of that. And I think that when you're talking about the embodied collective knowing, that touches on that.
Absolutely
that
does.
There's like, we don't, like the kind of our sense of being just purely individuals really creates a sense of like, it's like a loss of place, a loss of belonging. And being part of a lineage, being responsible for a lineage is a way of stepping back into like rightness in a certain way.
Authentic power.
Yeah. Power and accountability.
Yeah. All of that's true.
I'm curious, this isn't something that we've touched on yet. You spoke about Sharanya as a place that's informed by social justice and, or that it's not informed, but it's, dedicated to social justice, I guess, and to the service of that. And so we find ourselves in a situation in the United States where there's a lot of different ancestral lineages from many, many different places, right? And like, how do I deal with it if my ancestors were oppressive jerks, basically?
Oh, yeah.
Like, do you have any sense of or any wisdom about, well, what do I do? How do I mean, obviously, I do my work around social justice and try to walk my talk and to have good politics and to be a good ally and to be aware of my power and all that stuff. But like, how do we, if we have either, messes that our ancestors made or were victims of perpetration ancestrally, what do we do with that?
And you may have all of that in your past.
Sure.
Right? Many of us do. So I would offer a couple of things. One is you do the work now in the world. It's critically important, and you do what it takes to fortify yourself and to be all of those things that you mentioned. Strong in yourself, a strong ally, standing in solidarity with others, and being a voice for those who may not have voice at the table, right? All of that is incredibly important work. The truth is that many of us, increasingly, I think, with ways of finding out more about our ancestry, many of us are being surprised about what our past contains and what our lineage contains in that sense. And so there may be oppositions even within that space of our own heritage. One of the, I would say, offerings we can make is the creation of the container for that work to be done among our ancestors. And the ripple effects of that, bringing them into dialogue, having the creation of facilitated spaces in that realm where we engage with them and we invite healing, and we invite peace, and we invite a carrying forward of something new. The past is held in that particular ancestor in a way that we know gets carried forward. And so what we'd like to do is essentially say, I come with the intention of shifting the ripples that you've made in the pond in a way that promotes health, healing, and well-being, right? That promotes peace. So some of the work is that ritualized work of creating dialogue and spaces for dialogue in the realm of the ancestors. So I would say that's an initial piece, and it is also important then again to bring ourselves into the importance of our own work in this time, in this body, in order to be able to, let's say, move forward, right? And what I mean by that is move into greater awareness, into deeper relationship, and into greater potentials for love, so that we cannot create, the atrocities and challenges of the past.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I love that. And I think that there are a lot of folks starting to kind of wake up to that of like, oh, we have to create intentional spaces to heal and co-hold and heal this ancestral trauma that we're all carrying to a certain degree.
Yes. I mean, because at this point, it's not ours alone. It's all of ours.
Right. Well, I'd like to shift the focus a little bit. And I know that Sha'can is an embodied tradition. And would you be willing to speak a little bit about how you see the connection between ancestors and the erotic in Sha'can tradition?
Well, I'll give voice to it from my particular perspective. I mean, as a tantric, I think that so much of what we've been talking about is how we create more healthy selves. And by that, I don't just mean spiritually, psychospiritually, or through a felt sense of connection to the world. I also mean physically. And our body in so many ways is our greatest gift, and is not just a vehicle for experiencing, but is also the substance of the experience. And pleasure and the realm of the erotic and the awakening of our, I would say, acknowledgement of the necessity of suffering in the world, and yet our resistance to it through pleasure and joy is so important. And when I say the necessity of suffering, I mean that in Tantra, in my tradition, in Shakta Tantra, the belief in the choice of the incarnation and the moment of involution into the physical is filled with incredibly suffering for the spirit that so chooses. There is a limitation. There are many limitations, in fact. There are veils that one must progress through in order to finally be able to inhabit a body. So to get to this place in space and time is very limiting and very challenging. And yet the potential and the why it happens is because of this yearning for love and yearning for something beyond what can be known outside of a body. That is the most incredibly compelling reason to me for why we're here. And so it's almost as though pleasure and the erotic, our connections to ourselves and our sensuality, is the antidote for the choice having to be made, if we so choose, the experience of love, to the suffering we must endure in order to be here and have it.
I'm laughing because it just reminds me of this old joke I heard, and it came back as you were speaking. It said there's 10 reasons that souls incarnate. Sex is the first one, and I forget the other 9.
Yeah, I think it's something like that.
So, yeah, I love that. I mean, so it's like we incarnate. It sucks to incarnate. It sounds like it's hard. We get into these bodies, and then they have painful and limitations that are full of suffering. And then kind of the silver lining is sensation and pleasure.
Sensation and pleasure and the ability to experience love.
And the ability to experience love. Oh, that feels really good. I'm just having a moment of gratitude for
now, if we could take that into every kindergarten and start that understanding when kids are young, right?
Yeah.
I think the world would be a very different place.
Your body is for pleasure, sensation, and so that you can feel love.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The allowing of love, right? We talked initially when we were speaking of the two-way street of the ancestors about how hard it can be so often for people to get to a place where they're willing to experience that love, right? Across the world. Mm-hmm. To allow oneself, I mean, we know it in this body too, and in this reality, to allow ourselves to be loved can often be so hard.
Absolutely.
Because it requires such vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And so similarly, across the realms, and so similarly, if we can from some very young age trust, yes, we'll be hurt, right? Yes, all of that will happen. Of course, that's part of living. But to go again and again to the place of trusting, I am lovable, is so powerful and so healing and so transformational. And it takes work. I mean, that's the truth. We talked about this as well, that one doesn't get to relationship with the ancestors by, sort of the pro forma, I'll leave an offering. I mean, yes, that's a start. You have to go through the motions. But it's the work and the discipline of the practice and the willingness to engage and be witnessed, right? The willingness to fall apart and surrender into one's vulnerability that gets us to a place where we much more deeply understand the power of love and its potential. So that's not just lip service to an idea, but it's meaningful.
I'm reminded of one of the first times that I sat with you and you were talking as you do and teaching, and there was a time for questions and I raised my hand and I was like, yeah, okay, great. But when do I get to feel it? Right? When do I feel this love that you're talking about? And you're right. It's been an incredible journey of over a decade to do the practices, to do the work, to feel worthy, to feel lovable, right? To feel loved. Mm-hmm. And I get it. I get exactly what you're talking about. And on that note, you are such a brilliant, generous, gifted teacher that has had such an impact on my life in so many ways. And there's a debt of gratitude there that I can't ever repay. But I would love for you to, I know that you're going to be offering intensive training this fall called Igniting the Dark Goddess. And you write this, I'm just going to read it. You said that it's to help individuals come to the process of personal transformation in ways informed deeply by social justice concerns. One doesn't need to be a tantric, as this work is aligned with the larger issues of healing from trauma and what it means to be an active participant in one's embodied life journey, committed to increasingly aware relationships with self and the world. And I just wanted to invite you to speak a little bit about this training. Who's it for? How can people access it? What's going to happen? All that stuff.
Sure. Thank you for that. I'm really excited to be able to say that this is coming soon and that people at this juncture, because there's nothing available on the Charania website just yet, we're putting together some logistics, but people can feel free to reach out to me directly. You can email me at chandra@charania.org. And I'm more than happy to take inquiries and sort of keep a list of individuals who might be interested in this exploration. I think there are a couple of things I'd want to say. When I do this work, it's incredibly important for me to, I guess, share that this isn't as though it's a one-way street, getting back to all of our other dialogue. This is very much about community and the evolution of our potentials, and the guidance of the workshop around the kinds of things that you just mentioned really is an invitation for those who are interested in this exploration to show up. And so while there will be practices taught, and some of it will be meditation and visualization and the real work of going into different times and different places in order to connect to ancestors, in order to connect to potentials for personal healing, that what you bring helps to create what evolves. So much of this is about trusting the process in that moment. So, the outline of the day, the outline of the intensive, which will actually happen over a weekend, will be provided. But I just want to offer that everyone is welcome to come. there will be guidelines around safety and confidentiality and the things that we need to do to create the crucible for the work. And some of it is really, if you feel called, then come and engage around these key and central ideas that I have a place in this world. I choose and make choices in this world that are choices about solidarity and resistance. I choose to continue living my life in a way that is committed to my own health and healing, to deepened relationships and caring. And I am seeking out ways to ignite potential, specifically through the divine female, specifically through manifestations of the chthonic, the underworld, that which has been repressed within us, which sits outside of the normative, that which moves in cycles and beyond time. I choose to call on that and those energies to help guide me. All too often, those are not energies with which we're in relationship directly, and if we do call them, might only call them in response to something objectionable. And this is actually an opportunity to deepen our relationship in profound ways with the divine and with the potentials that we can bring to making the kind of world and the kind that we want it to be, and ourselves the kind of person that we want to be. So it's an opening to pulling ourselves into the future, bolstered by our ancestors and the work that she inspires.
I really see the threads of everything that we've just talked about in this offering, of really making a place for our whole selves as well as the wounds of history that we're carrying, and making a space that's, often we're so shut down in shame, we don't talk about it. And it sounds like, okay, let's bring it out and let's look at these things and figure out how we fit in and how we can be our whole greater selves. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. The one other thing that I want to say is that, we talked about discipline, and the discipline offered through Tantra is what guides and informs the structure. So it's not as though this is completely open, but just to be really clear that you mentioned the technology. So the spiritual technologies and tools of Tantra are employed to effectuate the kinds of outcomes that we want to see. So very excited to be doing it. And I certainly hope you'll join us.
I will definitely be there. And so if you are interested in learning more about Chandra's work and Sharanya, there are monthly open pujas that you can attend. There's a plethora of resources, blog posts, practices, mantras, amazing resources on the sharanya.org website. That's www.sharanya.org, SHARANYA.org. And Chandra, I just, from the bottom of everything that I am, I want to thank you for your time today and for the gift of your service to the entire community. It's been such an honor to have you here on Bespoken Bones. And I want to thank folks for listening to this episode. And I'm Pavini Moray, and we'll be back next time with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom. Thanks for listening.
Jai Ma, thank you.
Jai Ma.